All right, good to start with this. Hello, everyone. My name is Ahmed Mustafa. I'm a managing partner of Dopamine Startups, and I'll be moderating this panel today. Inshallah, going to be a great, exciting one. This is the third panel we are having within these few days, trying to give a context and new learnings and new networking for people. The previous day was on investments, capital, family offices, DFIs, de-risking, and set in that context. This panel today is on the other side, on the side of founders, raising capital, testing, failing, and learning, and then growing again, right? And making the shift, specifically within a new, I would say, revolution that's coming in, similar to the internet. Deep tech or artificial intelligence is also could be the new big thing. How and why we need to be part of it, of that, as a people connected to Sudan, as a Sudanese as well, and what we could do basically to build an industry out of that. Allow me to introduce the panelists, and we'll give them the floor to introduce themselves. We do have Osman, Mustafa, Alghali, Mo, Ali, Reem. Maybe we could start by this order as well. Give them the floor to introduce themselves, and then after that, we could take some questions to set the context and go around that. Feel free to add your Q&As. There is a button at the bottom. You can add your questions on it. We can take them at the end, inshallah. Yeah. Maybe we can start with you, Osman, then Mustafa, then we take Mo, Ali, and Reem.
Osman here, based in London, co-founder of Agemo. We're building CodeWords, which is an AI native platform to allow anyone and everyone to create automation by just chatting. So think of lovable meet end-to-end.
Hello, everyone. Glad to be part of this panel today. I'm Mustafa Alghali. I'm co-founder and CTO of Amplify Health, a startup based in Saudi Arabia. We're leveraging AI and thermal imaging to tackle screening programs for diabetic patients and in sports medicine. So think of radiology, but in terms of non-invasive and accessible.
Thank you, Mustafa. I am Mo, based out of Stockholm, co-founder and CEO of Epiminds. We are basically building a multi-agentic system to allow people to do paid marketing from A to Z using autonomous agents. Think if you're building a brand or like a product and you want to pay for some ads and you want to market in Google Ads or Meta or LinkedIn, you come to our platform and we handle everything from strategy to planning to campaign launching to monitoring to budgeting autonomously for you.
I'm Ali Lawad. I'm based in Ottawa. I specialize in AI and computer vision. I am a senior manager in Deloitte right now. I sold my company. I was called Data Performers to Deloitte. We were specialized in computer vision for manufacturing, as well as kind of different like computer vision in different other applied sciences. I'm very interested in learning about more startups and as well as an early stage investor at this stage. Reem?
Hi, everyone. I'm Reem El Seed. I'm based in London. I'm the co-founder and chief product officer of CleverChain. We are a RegTech B2B startup. We focus on building a coordinated suite of autonomous agents that handle critical compliance functions end to end.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. Good to start. Maybe we can start by setting the context with you, Mo. Maybe starting from there. And maybe let's start just very basic on definitions to give everyone that perspective and background. So you do work in that frontier of autonomous multi-agent system and all these, new technologies that we keep hearing about. So for founders, for the audience and people building within that area, what does AI autonomy actually mean in production today? And where does it still break down? Like basically, if you would to break down these terminologies in a simpler way, what does that mean? We keep hearing agents, we keep hearing all these terminologies.
So I think if we start from the base, you have an LLM, which is basically, or let's say you have an AI, and basically you could ask that AI a question and they could answer. That answer is basically based on the knowledge that the LLM knows. So that was kind of the introduction to AI by ChatGPT a few years back. And then quickly people realized that the basic knowledge in the LLM itself might not be enough. So maybe we need to give the LLM more knowledge in real time to answer more specific questions or domain specific questions. So then they started having like all these knowledge bases and attach it to the model. And then the model could answer questions about like a company or like a specific industry in a specific time period. And then people start thinking, okay, maybe answering question is not enough. Can we actually allow the model to do other stuff? Can we actually allow it maybe to send an email on my behalf? Can we allow it to generate a report in a PDF or like PowerPoint presentation? And that's when like the agent kind of concept came in. So the agent is basically an LLM with some capabilities outside of answering questions. And then people started experimenting with that. And for everyone who's been following, like agents kind of came 2 years ago and then they died quickly because everyone was building their own ecosystem of agents. And then no one had kind of a standard for it in the market. And then they died very, very quickly. And then Anthropic came and gave us the MCP, Model Context Protocol, which is basically a unified protocol of allowing agents to have different capabilities. And then you could build a capability in whatever programming language or framework that you want. And then you can just connect with MCP and then you would have more capabilities. So that's a single agent. So now you have one agent, you give them some capabilities, which called tool or tools technically, and then they can do stuff. And then people started thinking, what happens if you have more than one agent and then you allow them to do stuff? So then workflows became a thing. So people thought sequentially. So like I have one agent that does the first step, and then the second agent that does the second step, and the third agent does the third step. But that was like very kind of straightforward, very limited in kind of it doesn't provide like a dynamic value. You can predict what's going to happen. So that's the workflows, and then people made it a bit more complex by not having a sequential workflow, but like a workflow with conditions. So then you ended up kind of with a graph. And then you say, if this happens, then we will have this path until the end of the graph. If this happens, we have another path. And that's kind of it's not like pure multi-agentic, but it's kind of like multiple agents working in a almost deterministic full workflow. And then after that, people thought about like, okay, why do we need even to define paths? Can we actually just give the agents autonomy to decide what's the next step? And that's the concept of multi-agentic or autonomous agent started kind of to come up. Apologies for the long history, but I think it's very important for people to kind of know how things developed. And then people also started thinking simple again. So instead of having this like very complex system that you don't know what's going to do, let's start with a simple architecture call it supervisor, coordinator. It doesn't matter, where you have a supervisor agent with multiple agents under them. The supervisor delegate the task to specific agents. They collect the responses and then they communicate back to the human. That's a very simplistic multi-agentic system. It has a lot of issues. What we're doing at Epiminds is actually we're really pushing kind of the limits of technology. So we're saying that we cannot do a supervisor because there's a lot of cases that supervisor architecture cannot solve. What we are doing basically is like we have a lot of agents in one room. Each one of them has like kind of specialization or domain expertise. Each one of them have capabilities, but actually allow them to collaborate and communicate freely between them to kind of achieve a common goal. And that's kind of going to be the new basically paradigm where you would have really dynamic, autonomous, multi-agentic systems. And with that, there's going to be a lot of new opportunities kind of to provide value, both for consumers and for enterprise. answering the second part of your questions, what limitations? The biggest limitation at the moment is there is no best practices in the market for what we're doing. There is no standards. You cannot say like there is a paper that I can read and understand exactly how to build multi-agent autonomous system. So everyone who's working on this kind of frontier is actually building their own best practices and setting their own standards. And then, of course, we will share it back to the community and actually kind of agree on a common practice or a best practice, as Anthropic did with MCP and other companies did with RAG. But as of now, the biggest challenge is every team that is working on multi-agenting basically trying to answer the same questions, and there is no reference on what you're doing. And then the limitation is only your creativity and innovation. And this is what we are trying to do. We're trying to innovate, trying to create things that people haven't seen before, haven't thought about before. And once we kind of prove that they can work in real life, in production environments, then we would share that knowledge with the rest of the world and say, hey, this is the way that you can actually build multi-agentic autonomous systems.
Thank you, Mo. So it's a good start to say, first of all, there's a lot of technicalities involved into that and the knowledge we need to build also in terms of tech and at the back. But maybe let's take to another area with Reem before going to Osman back again. So Reem, also working on where you're coming from, compliance and the work that you do within your venture in markets that are heavily regulated in like fintech, blockchain. The trust and the compliance is very important. Whatever tech you bring in, at the end, it's not only about the technology you have. There is a broader ecosystem around it, heavily regulated, and it might be new stuff also people doesn't understand. So what are the biggest mistakes taking the heart of early stage founders building the space when they approach intellectual property, regulation, compliance? Because this is also a bigger conversation on accessibility to information, and to which extent that information that we are getting now is also something we could build on. So let's take that approach, and then we'll switch back to Osman into the research of the product.
So it's a very interesting question, because a lot of early stage founders make that same exact mistake when it comes to these three areas of regulation, IP, and compliance, especially with companies that are looking to be regulated or licensed by the regulatory body in that jurisdiction they're operating in or trading in. So I'll say the one problem that a lot of early stage founders have that cuts across all these three areas is that they always delay them. They think that it is just paperwork, it's administrative, we'll just do it later. Right now, we're just going to focus on building, and creating this new shiny product and onboarding the customers. But, and this is not just for B2B context, this also applies to B2C context, right? So I will explain very quickly why that is very problematic from day one. On the regulation side, if you are building a company, a startup that is going to require a license from the governing body, whether it's in the UK or in the Middle East or North America, or even Sub-Saharan Africa, spending a lot of time building something that eventually will require you to undo because the regulatory license that you need to acquire does not allow for the technology that you're selling to be accessible to the clients is very problematic. You're going to end up spending twice as much, basically building and then undoing and trying to make sure that the framework that you have is amenable for you to pursue that license, to sell your products and services. So that's on the regulation side. And one of the key things with regards to the regulation for you to actually obtain a license is to have to be compliant. Myself, Clever Chain, we focus on enabling companies to be compliant with anti-money laundering and anti-financial crime processes. That is not a walk in the park. That is not an easy feat. However, if you delay this, especially if you want to be a licensed organization and start trading as soon as possible, you need to make sure that you have all the processes in place that will withstand scrutiny by the regulators and make sure that they are satisfied with the requirements that you need to fulfill. So that's on the compliance side. And then last but not least, on the IP side of things, this is a question that you will always hear from investors asked in a slightly different way. They will ask you, what is your moat? Your moat is your IP. If you don't ensure that you have all the documentation, all the processes and procedures in place to make sure that you're protecting and retaining the IP within the confines of your company, that could easily get lost. People come and go in the early stage phase of a startup, whether it's on the tech side or the operational side, people come and go, but your IP is essentially accessible to everyone in the company. If you do not create the documentation that is necessary to protect this IP and make sure that it's retained within the company, and also, I mean, not to be draconian about this, but even your co-founders, right? Because, you know, you might be best friends, you might be great co-founders today, but next year you may actually realize that you do not work together, and your co-founder could take that IP and go spin up a competitor to your startup. If you do not create the legal framework or the governance structures to make sure that you're protecting the IP and the IP resides within the company as soon as possible, then you don't have a company, essentially. You can shut down almost overnight. So these three key areas, those are things that you should never delay. You should do as soon as possible. As painful as they are, as administrative as they are, it's better to do it early, because if you do it much later, you actually have a lot more to cover for you to achieve your IP protection, to be compliant, and to get your license.
Thank you, Reem. We took it from the very good tech to also the other side that people might not look at easily, and hopefully with your company also helping people.
Some functional requirements of a startup, I would say.
Yeah, the burning part, that's the most important part as well. I will go from here to Osman. So Osman, when you see people building in deep tech and the AI ventures, people often struggle to cross the gap between changing that research concept, that very technical, there's coming in lots of mathematics or lots of things at the back to revenue from this new market coming in. So what are the most common points that you see where these promising technologies fail to translate to a viable product? So translation, that research, that concept, and what we actually need to do as well. Also leveraging your background and how you build your companies along the way.
So actually this has been one of the interesting things, because when the AI bubble came in, there's a lot of revenue and capital available for research, and there was a lot of, like, I think OpenAI show people, like, from a research lab, you can do this. Like, in the story behind it was a lot difficult, because ChatGPT, from the name, was just an experiment that researchers put, and things catch fire and it opened a new door. And so I think after that, there has been like an explosion of new capital. Investors were like, oh, let's fund researchers, which was good for people like us. Obviously, it's easier to get capital. But I think the reality hits once you get that capital, and it's like, okay, now we have a lot of money from like an idea and so on. And when you start deploying this and doing research, I think this is where reality actually hit. And the problem, the most common things, I guess, number one is that the understanding actually, like, what are the pain point, because there is a lot of cool things that in research you can unlock that might have an impact in, let's say, another company that already building a product that is actually leveraging that research, or maybe that so an example of this, like DeepMind, we're doing a lot of research in like AlphaGo and solving games, and they managed to do quite a lot, and they want to apply some of these in the NHS, and things didn't work out at all. And it's similar, it resonates a bit with us as well. I think when we start from, okay, we want to unlock, let's say, like making models more intelligent, but not the starting of like, okay, what does that mean? What does that solve for the customer? And so this is one of the problems, is people trying to solve a general, and then when you unlock something, might show a nice demo, you might be able to raise the next round, but then it's harder to like productionize this. The second problem, I think it's also like, it's very hard to get good quality for what you want. And here I'm talking specifically about AI, either these like LLMs or maybe like image generation, video generation. The thing is, it's all related to data. And the big problem is people who don't hit the market fast, they basically lose on that data flywheel. And once you start losing on that data flywheel, more capital will not help you that much. And I can give example to some companies that started similar to us. We wanted to unlock software generation, and there's like magic They raised so much more. There is like up to 400 million, right? But they wanted to like offer this magical algorithm, long context lengths and so on. So they stayed hidden for a while in a hope that they're gonna drop the mic at some point. But then as soon as they realize is actually what they've done, by the time they actually wanted to release something, it wasn't doing well compared to all the big labs. Because the big labs, OpenAI, released something, and then after that, Anthropic came in, they released something, and they got that data flywheel coming. So the data flywheel has been very important, and you can see it now. You can see that OpenAI models are really good in content, because this is what they initially started with. ChatGPT, write me a poem. Anthropic is really good at coding because the first thing they did a lot of things when they released their first coding models, and so they kept doing that. And Gemini is really good, traditionally is really good at summarizing things because they were the first people to hit the long context lengths. So that means they got a lot of documents, people summarize it, they got a lot better. And so now it's concentrated on this, and then you have X, which I think it's not a X and DeepSeek, they're unusual, but DeepSeek, for example, utilize OpenAI data. So the data is the second big problem. And the last thing, I think it's a bit of talent. The last sharing is because you want people who very good at like research and math, but this is so hard for people to understand the pain point and to go after. And this might affect architectures, LLMs, transformers. DeepMind did not go through that much. They went for AlphaGo, near symbolic, really fancy architectures, while actually scaling transformers, which for researchers at the time was just a bit not as clever. That's why no one did it until OpenAI and Sam Altman like, hey, if it's working, let's keep adding more. So that's the third thing is making sure that the people who working with there, they actually coming a lot more from a product point of view. And this is our big learnings is that when we hire, we don't hire research engineers, not even, no research scientists, no research engineers, but more like AI engineers or software engineers who move into research rather than the other way around because they have a lot of product experience.
Thank you, Osman. I think that's also a good transition to Ali. So Ali, like it's also like you build scalable company within the field. Mashallah, you also exited that later on. It got acquired. So maybe my question to you, and maybe that's to have that thin line between tech research, compliance, and everything on the product development side to the market. So basically, how do you distinguish between an AI product or company that's technically impressive and a one that's commercially viable in the market later on?
Yeah, actually, I would hammer a lot of the points that Osman mentioned. So I would say technically impressive, like AI, technically impressive AI optimizes like metrics and things like that, but commercially valuable AI changes decisions. I think that's at the core of it. So, you're looking at metrics, you're trying to hit them. You can be on some sort of a leaderboard. That's great. But the commercial viable AI is trying to help change how we make decisions. So I've seen models that were objectively strong. They're very strong, but they failed because, they didn't reduce friction. They didn't have some sort of time-saving value to them. Or, they weren't able to create the decision that someone was willing to truly, repeatedly, trust. And I think that's at the core of it, right? You can have a very simple decision tree model, a CAD boost model that just kills it and does an amazing job at solving a problem. It is not fancy. It doesn't use a GPU. It's highly performant for the problem that it's intended to be. So the real inflection point here is, when customers stop, asking how the AI works, and then they start planning their operations and their budget around it. That's when it's working. And normally it becomes part of the business, infrastructure, not just a feature on the side. And hey, we have this cool feature and let's demo it, but what about making it part of the workflow? And I think for founders, like the lesson learned here, especially under, you're either, to Osman's point, you could be flush with cash, but you can also be under capital constraints. So the discipline is to ship simple models that delivers clear economic leverage. Sophistications, it should be earned later. Later, you can advance your research and come up with really cool features that can help your retention and maybe carve more of the market share. But in the beginning, get that first feature going. And in fact, it could be a simple machine learning model, not multimodal thing or any of the above, right? And that's totally fine. So I would say that's kind of at the core of it. And also what I've seen, like in large, most AI that looks impressive. So I've seen quite a bit of demos because we go head in head with companies that are demoing their solutions, or I have to really investigate, or I'm an acquirer of a product that I want to bring it on to the company. These models they look very impressive, but they're very clunky, and they're almost like a liability. They're overbuilt, they're fragile, they're patched in so many ways, and they're good for demos, but they suck at deployment. So that's when I realized, commercially viable AI is often very boring. It works under bad data, imperfect inputs, uncooperative users. It knows how to deal with non-golden standard type of situation. So it doesn't win on model elegance. It wins, by being trusted enough to quietly replace human judgment in most of the cases. And that's how my journey has been, joining Deloitte and focusing on deploying this very practical application. And to Rim's earlier point related to compliance, one of the things that really stop some of the applications dead in their track is compliances and notion of ethics of these applications, right? I was trying to push a safety application with computer vision on a mining company, and I was going in there thinking, this is the most interesting thing they can ever implement. I got pushback from the labor unions that they don't want to have cameras there. I'm like, this is for your safety. They're like, yeah, but I don't want you to be looking at me for whatever reason, right? And so that doubt about solution and being compliant with the labor union here would kill the application if you're not really careful. It changes from country to country. This might be totally fine in another country. That might actually be encouraged. In fact, the team on the ground might like that for their own safety. So the perception from one jurisdiction to another varies quite a bit. And I hope I answered the question.
No, perfectly right, because sometimes a farmer in the far places of Alghali working on thousands of faddans might need a very basic AI model to give them how they could plant a seed or get to know something very, very simple. Doesn't need to be sophisticated, right? And that would make millions of dollars actually for the business. But when we're stuck in loving the product, loving the technology, getting just deeper into it without finding the market for it, then there is a mismatch here, right? Coming to you also, Mustafa, like you within your company, you tackle markets like in Saudi Arabia and the GCC. You live in the tech part into the company. So building in healthcare and a very regulated space like in healthcare within the region. How do you think about the technical defensibility, and how you think of in general architecture from day one when you scale and you get the capital and resources are limited? And the reason I'm saying that because you probably spend lots of time and capital into getting approval, healthcare, so data of people, etc. And then by the time we go to the market, we just open a massive market at once. How do you deal with that when you have a limited access to resources, time, capital into it? How was your experience basically into that?
Right. So, يعني whatever, mashallah, Osman, Mo, Ali, or Reem mentioned earlier already answer part of this question, but I would like to add two projections that may be relevant to my personal experience في الGCC وفي الهيلث specifically. أولا إنه usually when someone comes to ask about what it requires to build something in health tech, I would say like you really have much more check boxes that you need to check before you start something in health tech. And I haven't chosen it. It's happened that I jumped in health tech. I like it, but I coming from completely different industry, from ads and gaming, which is very different outlook as an entire business regulations and execution. In health tech, I found myself like currently I'm serving as a CTO in the company, but found myself like becoming regulatory consultant part-time and the compliance and editor, and then changing roadmap items, because you eventually needs to find a way what it's required to bring a product. Like in health tech, things are way behind in terms of innovation compared to other sectors, but that's for a reason, because what it's required to bring it there, as I mentioned, it's multiple checkbox, like first regulatory, clinical trials. You need to kind of do multiple pilots to bring the customers for different, like the trust that they need to operate on patients, and then you have as well the reimbursement game, which is health economic studies and value-based care and so on. So that is influence how you build the entire technology from day zero, as you mentioned in your question. Like how exactly, I'm literally finding myself always rearranging our own internal roadmaps in terms of like the products, the features, and what is important based on like how they would actually fit into the regulatory framework. How can we actually, oh, this feature actually gonna need some clinical trials to work on them, to make submissions to the authorities and so on, and which market we're gonna launch it at, how the product actually would look like in a few years. You need to think about it, because it's not like, oh, let's deploy a feature over the weekend and that's it. It takes sometimes months to bring one feature into an entire release. So that's, I would say, building in health tech is longer cycles, requires lots of understanding, engagement in a constant level with consultants and internal auditors and externals. And all of that requires like you as technical team needs to acquire that knowledge. You cannot work in isolation, build something, and then try to figure out how it's going to be regulated after. You need to think about it from day zero, as Reem mentioned. Like when you come to do that down the way after a while, it's going to be much, much longer work. And the good thing, it creates a barrier from those fast followers and competitors, but it's still a burden. I wouldn't say like it's a process that everyone enjoys. It's lots of documentation and processes, and no one likes to be pulled out from their work to write a document about a feature that gonna release that takes actually almost double the time that they took to develop the feature itself. So it's still a burden, but if you make it, it is gonna make you in a competitive edge. The second point, yeah, go ahead.
No, continue. Yeah.
Yeah, the second point I wanted to highlight is your partners, mainly your investors. Not everyone understands deep tech. If you go and align with the wrong investors, it's longer cycles. They don't understand the risk in how to build deep tech, what does it mean on R&D milestones, and what is success looks like actually to bring deep tech in the region. I'm talking specifically for MENA region as well, because that is fundamentally rooted in innovations in Silicon Valley and in Europe. But now we start to see more of these, that they actually invest in deep tech inside the region and globally. But the majority still like would ask you about your ARR from the second month, which is it's not relevant for how deep tech is actually being built. So that's the second kind of maybe main point I would mention is choose your investors wisely that understand deep tech and would be like aligned with what we're building down the way.
Yeah, thank you, Mustafa. Now we'll try to switch into two main sections. So we'll start. So we spoke now about the product, the context, the background. It's quite heavy industry, of course, and two things that resonate a lot is one, team execution, right? And two is capital to grow and understanding the investors. So we'll start with what's required to scale, build team, and all that stuff. We'll go into that section, and then later on we'll talk about how basically what were your experiences in fundraising and what people could learn from that, and what are the tricks and how people need to navigate fundraising for similar startups in the field. Let's start first with the teams. Maybe I will come back to you, Mo. You did mention at the beginning, strong team at the back. You mentioned, providing agents to help you, and I saw a couple of articles you put about, having one CEO and a team of agents working with you, and I think that's interesting because building software have changed, and building companies have also changed. Lovable came in and changed how people build software from scratch. And you do also something similar, helping marketing people in the marketing field as well. Maybe taking that question and also your experience, and when you compete, and this is in your case, in your company, when you compete with the large, well-funded competitors in the market out of Stockholm, but globally, of course, focusing on global markets in the US and Europe and etc. And leveraging your experience building the product, and even currently, how would the small teams with the small team members and limited resources would still have a real advantage today, and where they shouldn't try to compete, like where they could need to basically put their resources? Everyone tell you be smart in your work, but how? And what's the role of these new technologies into supporting a smaller team to still compete with a very, very largely funded and companies operating in a very more stable market? Like, in short, how would someone coming out of Sudan with their limited resources, yet access to software and an idea, could still compete on that scale?
So I think founders and investors have different perspectives on this. I would take it from the investor perspective first, because it's like the easier perspective to understand. Investors don't really care about like the idea and the traction in the beginning. I think they care more about the market that the idea operates in and the founders. So whatever like you can showcase as a founder, show like you're a special founder, and that could either be like credentials, like educational credentials, or like experience, or even if you're like a younger founder, it could be just like grinding and just like trying different things. They really look into that. The second thing is like, how big is the market? Like, it doesn't matter like where you start or like how many customers you have at the moment. If the market is big enough and your idea or kind of perspective of the market and how it's going to grow in the future makes sense, just logical, then usually kind of they take a bet, especially like the small investor that give like 100K or 500K. And especially in this atmosphere now, in this climate, like investment seems to be easier than the last few years. At least I think we've seen kind of similar pattern between 21 and 22, and then 23 when the market crashed a bit. So 25 seems to be like a good year to kind of raise money. I think the first half of 26 is going to be the same. So that's from the investment perspective, if you're thinking about like having a VC-backed company. And then from the founder perspective, I think the only thing that works for the founders until they reach a PMF is the speed of execution. And like, you cannot think about moats and like, what's my defensibility strategy? Like, none of that matters more than the speed of execution. If you have an idea and you can quickly execute on it and talk to customers and let them try the product and get their feedback and iterate quickly and then provide more features and more value to the customers, that's what matters. One of our partners, VC partners, said like, you don't matter until you hit 10 million ARR. And I think until 10 million ARR, speed of execution is the only thing. And the reason for this is, yes, you have like big competitors, they have a lot of money. The issue with big competitors is like the internal politics of the organization or enterprise, the bureaucracy. Even if they have the same exact idea as you, they need like 1,000 of approvals or 100 of approvals until it reaches the customers, because they cannot risk their reputation. They cannot put out a product that kind of have a negative impact. So usually they take so much time, even if they have the same exact idea as you, to put it in the market. And then in that time, if you execute enough, you start acquiring customers and people will know about you, and then you acquire more customers and the flywheel just goes on. And I can give a quick example of this. Like Google has Gmail. It's like the most used email client in the world. they have waited so long to put any AI features in it that superhuman became kind of the default for every professional in the world. And Grammarly just went and like put $1 billion or took $1 billion from General Catalyst to acquire superhuman. So you can create a lot of value while waiting for the incumbents kind of to create the similar value, or like even less value than you. So I think to compete with the bigger competitors, just focus on speed of execution at the beginning. That's like the only mode that you can have for the first period if you're a startup. Sorry, just to add to that, when it comes to now, like AI is kind of like this paradigm shift in tech. So for the last 10, 15 years, we have seen a lot of companies after the cloud, they became more verticalized, and you need to solve a specific problem for a specific niche, for a specific customer, and then you make it more efficient, and then you sell to that customer. I think with the AI paradigm, like the whole thing is shifting. Like now there's a new technology, not a lot of people actually are using it or like kind of utilizing it to build new products, even though we are in a bubble, all of us here. But like in the wider world, like the consumption of AI is not as big as the internet, for example. And what that gives you is not only like you need to focus on this specific vertical, but it actually gives you a way to rethink like whole industries or like whole products. Like, is this actually the experience that we can afford, given that AI is possible? And then now you have seen or starting to see like a lot of these full stack kind of products. Like, I'm going to take accounting. I'm not going to only sell something specific in accounting, but I'm going to build like an AI accounting software that takes accounting from A to Z. And the same for customer support, the same for legal work, the same for marketing. That's what we're doing. And I think the benefit of AI is like it allows you to rethink the whole thing. Like, is this the limit? Or can I actually build something that takes the whole experience that have been there for like the last 50, 70 years and actually create experience that can live in the next 50 to 7 years as well?
Thank you, Mo. So we spoke about one part about how to utilize the tech to also help compete. As you mentioned, the different perspective. Going back to the team and forming teams, and in the current also place we are, and coming to Yuri, maybe you see also with the situation that Sudan also is in now, and Sudanese are scattered all over in one small again. How do you see also, if you were to put the hat again and try to today, if someone wants to form a team, a global team, as Mohammed mentioned and other mentioned, a strong team with talents, different market, different exposure. You bring someone very skillful, lived, grown in Sudan or any place elsewhere, and someone in the diaspora, raised outside, so the market, have all these different competencies. How we could be possible as a Sudanese? How could you leverage these diaspora networks and to move beyond the social introductions and meeting people, to take it to actually professionally building bridges for investors that are connected to Sudan, investing with other founders, or helping them getting access to customers or credibility in global markets? How we could leverage that also from your perspective and point of view? How do you see that, and how we can maybe take it, as I mentioned, more from the social aspect to more professionally building and leveraging these good network now?
So
sorry, go ahead, Reem.
Go on.
What was it? By the way, was it the question for me or for him?
You are hijacking the question now. It's for
okay.
him.
All right, go for it. Sorry.
Happy to give you after, Mohammed. Yeah, go ahead, Reem.
Yeah, so I would say that we already have the ingredients or the raw materials يعني كالشعب السوداني to actually go and transition from this social side of things to more a networking professional side of things. So I will start off with, we're a very social population, right? If you need a friend or a contact, if you travel abroad and you're like, oh, I'm looking for Sudanese, we will have that social connection through a friend of a friend or a cousin and a second cousin, right? We need to shift that beautiful culture that we have into economic connections, right? So instead of focusing on needing social support, we need economic support. And that means talking about what kind of skills you have, marketing yourself about the skills that you have. So yes, I'm a data scientist, I'm a product person, I'm an operations person, and so on and so forth. And looking for opportunities that would support your skills or for you to be able to plug into other Sudanese networks, professional networks. Another thing that we could also transpose is essentially the ability for us to create credible professionals everywhere in the world, right? I can guarantee you everyone here in the panel and every attendee here can guarantee that if you go to any country and you know that the doctor that you're going to go see in Sudan is Sudanese, regardless of where they are, you're going to have confidence that you have good care, right? Because for whatever reason, we know at Dakatra Sudani, they're fantastic. Now we need to apply that same mentality in every single discipline, in every single sector, whether it's tech, whether it's investment, finance, because the reality is we are exceptionally good. We are very dedicated to the job. And it's just establishing that same level of credibility that doctors have in Sudan, in MENA region globally, in other sectors and other disciplines. And last but not least, I would say creating organizations like 249 Startup Hubs, right? Creating a center of gravity for Sudanese to go towards and start establishing these professional networks and connections. Like I can go to you, Ahmed, and say, hey, listen, Ahmed, I need software engineers, and these are the kind of skills that I have. I'm sure you will have in your repertoire because of the connections that you have established, and say, oh, I know so and so they have these skills, right? Or I might come to you and say, Ahmed, I'm looking for investment because we're looking to open operations in this different jurisdiction. Because of the organization that you have created, you have already established a professional network and a social network that you can support other Sudanese in different capacities. So establishing these kind of centers of gravity for the Sudanese diaspora in all the areas where we are heavily concentrated, like MENA, North America, and of course the UK and Europe, we can then start creating this web of this professional network web. And we already have the raw materials to create that. It's just a matter of activating them and transposing them from a social kind of network to a professional network or an economic network.
Yeah, thank you, Reem. Do you want to add anything to that, Mo?
I wanted to hijack the whole answer, but I think Reem got a very good answer. Just to add to the first point, like the social aspect, I think it's definitely like we're a social population by default, and one thing that we usually have as Sudanese, like we're a bit shy to ask direct questions or like for connections or like for favors. And this is something that I really noticed when I went to SF. Like the American people by default is also like very social, like very, very similar to Sudanese people. But they bring it to the next level by just being very direct. If you need help, if you need an introduction to someone, you can ask that person, by the way, like, can you introduce me? And if they can, they will do it. And if they can't, they just like let you know. And then you don't take it personally if they can't. But I think just like toning that up a little bit, like capitalize on the social aspect, just be very direct with what you want and ask for introduction, ask for favors, ask for capital if you're talking to an investor. And then like the worst that can happen is like you get a no, and we are, as a population, we are used for rejections, like from visas to university applications to bank loans. I don't think it's going to be worse than that.
Yeah, so it shouldn't hurt more, right? Yeah, we're used to it. That's the default thing. And I agree. I think that's a very, very important thing. I think we are being raised to be humble, like mutwada, don't speak out, and that we need to change that thing definitely.
Can I add something to that? So I had that attitude and approach several years ago until I read a book called Never Eat Alone. Right, it got me out of that mindset because essentially, and I'll just sum it up in one sentence. Essentially, what it is establish your network, go and meet people before you need them. Right, just meet with them for a coffee, for a meal. At that point, you still don't need anything from them. But then, when you've already established that rapport with that person, or if you've already raised a concern and said, hey, you know what, I'm looking for investment, and the person you're meeting with isn't providing you an investment connection, maybe they will talk to someone coincidentally the next day and they'll be like, oh, actually, you know what? Reem was actually telling me yesterday that she was looking for an investment opportunity. So I think fundamentally is don't go and pursue people because you want to get something out of them. Build that rapport. Just build that social connection, which is what we already have. And it will organically and naturally emerge that you can professionally help each other. And the book, Never Eat Alone, I mean, I'm sure you can go on ChatGPT and say, summarize it, or TLDR, summarize it to me. It will tell you essentially the same concept. But, we're very social. It's just a matter of, just getting out of that comfortable position of asking for something professionally, start socially, and then the professional connection will eventually appear.
Yeah.
If I might add something here, and sorry to be very consulting, but we do this relationship mapping, and then we try to put people in the 3 triangles, right? So you're hardworking, you can bring effort and time, and you're eager to learn. You're early 20s, mid 20s. You wanna do things. You don't have a lot of money to your name, but you got effort, ability to produce, right? And then you get specialized people at the, let's say, another level where they know something very well. They don't have capital, but they just kill a field, right? Like they know biotech, and we need to help them raise money. And at the right stage is, I would say, people who either have the capital or they have the audience, right? So audience is money right now. So then the idea is do the relationship mapping and then map these to them, and then we can quickly bubble things. So that's we do that a lot at work, but I think it applies here. So maybe that could be a quick way to connect the dots fast.
No, absolutely, and I think we definitely need to work more into that within our programming. Even you get to realize there is that mindset shift that need to be done. It's not an issue of tech. It's not an issue of that. It's just an issue of mindset, as you mentioned. How we could basically say that it's okay to ask, and at least the first thing we start with, at least at the network of 249 is, at least everyone here is here to help you and give something. So feel free to ask to break that thing. Maybe I will continue with you, Ali. I will shift into the capital and the growth part, or we'll go to Ali and Osman to take a different perspective. We spoke with Mo and Reem on the human side and the team and competition. I would like to tackle it from a different side. Everyone asks, even if I build the best product and I put it to the market, how easy it is to raise money for investors. This is one. 2, as a Sudanese, there is another complexity level. Even if you start building outside of Sudan as well, it is still, you are technically within underrepresented segments, and you don't have established networks. Most of techies goes to work, they goes to masters. So it's not, people building, for example, out of Khartoum and then, scaling basically to San Francisco from there, straightforward, right? It's not like from London or even from Dubai or from Doha, etc. It's a different thing, and it might not be something we had it in our DNA, to put it that way, in startups, not necessarily on the traditional businesses and agriculture. So maybe Ali, putting the hat of acquirer perspective, and looking at let's look at the journey in reverse. What are the key milestones that founders building in deep tech need to demonstrate really for you, right? To be taken seriously into multi-million rounds, or like a couple of rounds. And I'm asking this question because you were a founder, and you exited the company in between, and now you are working on the other side. Even if not like investor, but you are seeing the whole market, you are seeing what's needed. What type of advice you would basically tell people, or what the advice you will tell your younger Ali you were building basically at that time?
Absolutely. So I don't directly work in the capital funding, but I've been part of one of the largest acquisition in the firm here in Canada. Was really higher millions. So what are you looking for at that stage? So I'm assuming that you're talking multiple millions. You're beyond the pre-seed and perhaps even the seed, right? You're looking at the later stages, if I'm understanding you correctly. Yeah. So at that stage, the investors, they're basically they're underwriting risk. They're not buying your vision at this stage. They just want to know that you really de-risk. They already seen your numbers. They know that you have a place in the market that people use your solution for. And you can look at this thing from like three areas. So first, like your technical defensibility, not just the tech that works, but why it's hard to replicate. So proprietary data, like Osman mentioned earlier, the data flywheel kind of thing. the workflow locking, like you got users using your solution really heavily, and they're relying on it for their operations, and other kind of compounding advantages, right? Like you got the features that people really like, and there's some sort of an ecosystem that really works. You got long-term contract locked in with your clients. The second thing is basically that, which is the commercial proof. So customers who renew, expand, and like really operational and depend on the product, not just like pilots and you're collecting logos. That would not fly right at that stage. And I think, and the last thing is the governance readiness, which is I think what Reem talked about, right? Like clean IP ownership, clean cap table, compliance posture should be top notch, and because at that stage you really don't want to bring in risk to the organization. So actually the headache of acquiring company might not be the cost, might be to bring them on board, to integrate them, but you're also inheriting risk, right? So you were trying to minimize that at that stage. And if you have all that, then your structure, your company might survive like the due diligence. But a lot of the deals that could be a perfect exit from technology, from very interesting type of products fail because they cannot really pass that stage. And I'll keep my answer short.
Yeah, thank you, Ali. We'll move from that to Osman. So Osman, building from maybe also taking your journey so far. You've been in the corporate world. You worked within Microsoft, and then you started your own company. You're obviously coming from that Sudanese background, which is also different from the ecosystem. Do you see that founders coming from similar ecosystems, like in Sudan or also in Africa, are seen as in disadvantage, or you see it as a strength when bringing maybe different perspective? How would you look into that, and what would be your advice also for others? Sometimes people feel like even mentally, we shouldn't try because no one will believe in us or invest in us, right? How was that question resonated with you throughout the years?
No, I think this is it's basically I can say my perspective changed so much. And as to your point, I think back in the corporate and even at university, I think you had that mindset again, like really tough. I mean, tough with the standard here in the West is like unbelievably tough for them, right? And so we feel like maybe I shouldn't I try to basically mask my background, because obviously in academia it's very different. Most of the people, if you went to like good university, most of the people, they're probably coming from really good, where like, oh, my dad also studied at Cambridge, or my basically like, oh, I came here to do my summer school and things like that. And so you start talking to people, you start masking your background. And I think this is similar in the corporate world, where basically like similar like at Microsoft, it's we still kind of felt like, yeah, like I should do double what everyone's doing to be able to rank similar to my peers, right? And at some point at a lot, I think like, oh, I could do a lot better job than the people above me, even the people above and above. And it's just basically, again, like it felt this is what I'm doing my entire life. As again, coming from Sudan, we had to work extra hard to just be same. But I think what changed is I never realized how much taking a risk make a difference outside when you come to the startup world. Because this is where I feel like we can utilize our strengths, our story, our background, our bringing. And this is, I think, also helps in the company building, because you have a very different perspective. You're able to survive long enough. There is the high and low and things like that. And I think this is, I'd say like that's where my perspective changed. And now I'm more outward with my background, more taking my any like disadvantages or upbringing as actually like a strength in all aspect. And the interesting bit, I think, when it come to especially for seeking capital, because people will be like, oh yeah, like seeking a lot of multi-million capital, coming to Sudan, which is like just even with for parents, like, oh, you had a really good job at Microsoft. Why are you quitting your job to start a startup with no salary? And it's just like explaining that in itself to family is like very big, very different. And it's like, why are you throwing it all away for this? But I think it completely shattered my mind now, and I encourage so many people, especially because we most of the time, especially in tech and AI, we do a lot more than our peers, I think. We never realize it because, again, linked to all these points, we don't talk about it. We're not confident about it. We don't share it that much. But I think when you start talking a lot more about it, there is always people who aspire to this because they maybe like they have their own journey, but they think, oh, you came from there to here. That's so much amazing. That means if I put some capital in you, you go from here to there. And this is resonated, I think, in our pre-seed as well. We basically through networks like, oh, why did you leave your job? Is because I want to do this. I believe in this, and they look in the history, and you went from there to there, and slowly, they more people. Initially, obviously, it's not you're going to get people who believe in you, but the people who believe in you, they will actually narrate your story even better. And this is what I realized happening, the echo effect, when someone refer you to someone else, and this is where the network comes in. They always bring the background. It's like they went from this to this, and then this is start resonating. And actually, in our undisclosed seed round, which we're going to announce it soon, one of the interesting things is I was talking to when the Fashir, went through this. I was talking to some of our existing investors that I have cousins who died there, and like it's been, and then he started listening on like all the upbringing, and especially talking about my dad who was in Fashir, and then he was like, you know what, I'm going to do a panel discussion. Just to talk about your story and your co-founder story, and like, would you be able to do this? Just be honest. And initially I got really stressed because like, oh, I need to make it much worse, than it is. I was talking to my wife, how can I make it like sound like we like so much bad? But I think one thing interesting is just by saying the normal thing, for them that sounded like, wow, like you actually, because they were saying, oh, you actually in a war your entire life, but like, no, I wasn't. But Sudan has been always in a civil war for the last 50 years. And actually mentioning that story, sharing all the upbringing, what went through, and so on. And then with the product launch, and we launched and so on. And we got other investors, they just loved the story. They tried the product, and we just closed in like 5 days. We didn't even like go on fundraising mode, but they were so going back again. They were like, oh, we find the story very unique. And if we can see any evidence of it, even though we still just launched, they see, okay, there is something on the product, seems to be doing well, but they love the founder story so much, the background, the upbringing. And I never realized talking about these things will actually like do that. And now like I feel like this is a superpower that we can use by just mentioning where we are up to now. And I'm pretty sure basically people would appreciate this, and we'll get people who are happy to put their money and say, I back you because you managed to survive up to this point.
Thank you so much, Osman, for sharing that. I will go for one last question on the capital and the story to Mustafa, and then we can take. I have one general question at the end, and then we'll take a question or two from the audience. Mustafa, I had the pleasure of knowing you for years. Like, mashallah, even when you were in university, you started your first company, Semicolon, and there was lots of software engineers, and then of course you went into different industries, and now back to starting a different venture, raise capital, and you try different hats. Basically, what are the advice you would say to your younger Mustafa, basically? And if we would like to talk about the future from here, there is a lot of communities emerging in Sudan, and you go outside. Like it was some months ago, even outside Sudan, and there was this guy speaking as well about how he met these Sudanese software and AI students in Rwanda and in Ghana and South Africa and in Tunisia, and how they were very impressed by their technical skills. So you see that there is an emerging good skill set. But we're speaking about venture, and there is a very few into that. How we could bridge that gap, basically what we could do, and also leveraging your own career path into that. And you obviously know a lot of them as well. I think that could be like an advice, but also a reflection into where you started and where you are now, and inshallah where you want to be.
Right. Thank you, أحمد. لو ممكن عايلاها historically يعني أنا عملت ماسترز في الآمي بروجرام. We were the first cohort اللي هو الأفريكان ماشين learning intelligence program في كيغالي, and we were the first cohort. فكان بعدين جو كمية من السودانيين, and كنا بنجي من جامعة الخرطوم, جامعة السودان, كمية من جامعات السودانية, بيكون في large batch وما شاء الله يعني حاليا 7 أو 8 cohorts since the inception حق البروجرام. معظم الناس ديل they ended up in big tech companies, like you name it. معظم ال big names, we have one at least in one of these big companies, and some of them they started their own ventures or like they worked in promising startups. فمن ناحية talent it's always wasn't يعني questionable ال dedication حقنا نحن كسودانيين, والlearning والwillingness to always يعني improve. الحاجة اللي فعلا ذكرت إنه فيها gap هي إنه how to translate these into ventures. أنا النصيحة اللي ممكن أديها لنفسي اللي هي could translate to people similar إنه أنا جاي من technical backgrounds وكده, إنه ما تشتغل on isolation, ما تشتغل براك. النصيحة اللي ذكرتها ريم جبال ومحمد, في نصيحة أنا ممكن أطلع بها من السيشن دي كلها هي اللي قالوها دي. ما تتعشى براك, don't eat dinner alone. بجد النتوركينج will open your eyes على كمية من الحاجات اللي أنت ممكن تتعلم, وبتشوف بعد ذاك وين الجاب اللي هو السكيلز حقتك دي أو الحاجة اللي أنت قاعد تبني فيها. هل does it fit ال direction that you wanna go له, ولا في حاجة actually أنت شايفها كجاب you can distinguish by networking. يعني أنا هسه دي قاعد شغلي الحالي ده قاعد أشوف الجابات بين الدكاترة. أنا بشتغل مع مستشفيات الهيلث كير وديل, وبعد شوي بشوف في التكنولوجي how it's evolving, وبعد شوي بشوف ناس الريجوليشنز من جهة, والجابات ضخمة جدا يعني بيناتها. فأنا قادر عن طريق الانتراكشن بتاعي معاهم, ما عشان قاعد أقرأ في كتب, بشوف المشاكل دي وين حاصلة والجابات دي جاية من وين. لو أنا قاعد في بيتي وبقرأ في كتب وقاعد to improve myself, yes will get me far, لكن في الفنشر you really need to go get the pain points حقت الناس, وإنه وين الحاجة اللي أنت ممكن تحلها دي. ف talk to lots of people, reach out to ناس that يعني 249 startups as a hub, communities, like don't shy from asking for help أو asking for introductions. يعني أنا لو بعاين ورا كمان سيمي كولون كان عملناه ونحن لسه ستودنتس وكده, كنا بنحاول to start some برضو machine learning products based. والوقت ذاك معظم النولج اللي قاعدة to build الحاجات دي قاعدة very fragmented, يعني some paper قاعدة في archive somewhere تمشي تقراها عشان تفهم الموديل ده شغال كيف. حاليا like انستغرام ريلز وسبوتيفاي بودكاست تلقاهم قاعدين يشرحوا في the latest concept, and I don't need to go even do an entire course on a material to just get an overview of what's going on في الفيلد. فالاكسسبيليتي for the learning materials والحاجات دي خلت انه التالنت بول كبير جدا. but how to move away اللي هو الفاندمنتالز ما تغيرت. you provide a value, والفاليو دي تقدر تعريفها بانك انت قادر to connect the dots. connect كيف؟ ما تتعشى براك, go and really find the pain points حقت الناس وين, و try to build the value out of it. الباقي the same thing. When you build a venture, don't overestimate your technical skills that gets you that far. It's not يعني أنا من technical background. I used to work with يعني myself and the peers اللي كانوا شغالين معي. We think إنه because we can code good, we can build good products and we can scale them. But the longer I stayed in the venture part of building. It requires more than that. فبرضه بعد ما انت to know where is the opportunity, get the right people to help you with المشوار اللي انت هتبداه. شوف انت وين انت technically solid. You need someone to complement, to be able to handle opportunities, to do الحاجة اللي انت ما كويس فيها. ودي حاجة just don't get overconfident about your background. You need someone complementary to do the job.
Yeah, thank you. It's a good to close on this note. One last question, general for everyone. Has nothing to do with tech, with teams, with all this stuff. I think this question has to do with the current situation we are in as Sudanese and closer or extended families, and everyone have something. There's a lot of pressure on mental health of founders. Like you or people have been building. There's a pressure of investors, pressure of new countries, different markets, pressure of employees, pressure of smaller families, larger families. How do you adapt with that, or how important is also that to give a space for everyone to release that pressure? And because when you look at today, for example, in Sudan, there is people just on action mode every single day. So it's not also easy to take a stop and basically just think or take a pressure into that. Osman, you see you open your mic, and then Ali, please.
I wanted to share some because this is واحدة من أكبر the most resonating thing. I think looking back, I always keep saying at the startup journey, I feel like I lay more on the mental health more than anything else because it puts you in a very it's really tough. And so actually I feel like the survival of success of the startup is how you navigate your mental health and how to do this. And I think to your point is very unorthodox to talk about that had, especially like with family, culturally, it's very, very hard. But I think that's the biggest problem right now is actually not being able to address it, even to yourself. It's like, actually, you know what, Anna, this has been too much, or like basically being able to understand there is issues, like and trying to understand yourself better, then making an action. And again, like um, people, I think like therapy Sudan, I grew up knowing in the nas مجنونين, you go to therapy, but it's very important. I feel like it's and therapy here doesn't have to be like you pay to someone to have therapy. I mean, right now, even being able to read about the mental health, talk, having someone you can talk to, you can share, you can be vulnerable, ways and so on that they understand, these. I feel like this is a very, very crucial to be able to survive and to succeed.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Osman. Ali, please go ahead. Yeah.
Perfect. I echo Osman's point quite a bit. Actually, right now I'm not starting a journey, but when I did, there was quite a bit of pressure. Actually, the first pressure really came in for us was, we built a cool tech, we got a client, we're trying to get the other one. The stress of like needing to sell more, but also like really perfecting our product, or not perfect, just good enough to go to market. So it's kind of like that juggling between both was hard while trying to also raise money. And I do remember staying up literally 12-hour time difference trying to raise capital, meeting with 100 VCs because we're targeting manufacturing and companies in electronics in Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan. And but for some reason, I did manage to keep a very positive outlook. Like I would wake up at 3 a.m. and trying to take a call with 14 people staring at me. But somehow I found a way to enjoy it, knowing that you got a support core founders that really would listen to you. And we had this kind of situations like, what is the worst thing going to happen? Like we are really driven. We can sit down and make something work. So we always found some sort of comfort in that we're really hardworking, something would unlock. So it's the mindset that going into it. And the last thing, maybe it's kind of funny, but my wife is a psychotherapist, so she definitely put my mindset in the right place when I have to focus on what's really important in life. And sometimes being maybe an overdriver and doing 100% only on work while not enjoying other parts of life. It's something that you have to really keep in mind, or being closer to family and being there for them, and slow down on work. Things could balance, right? Like we go in we have ups and downs, you know, in our career, in our time as we progress. So it's good to recognize that early on. And I'm listening to this from a person, our first date, I did not believe in therapy at all. I was like, Osman's like, what is that? To now, like, I do understand this.
Thank you, Ali. Reem, I see you open your mic, and then Mo.
Osman and Ali, they hit the nail on the head, right? In terms of how to approach your mental well-being. And one thing is that most of us don't really have the luxury of finding a professional therapist to talk to and to navigate through these complex thoughts. But even if it's just a friend, you know, a family member, or even if you just write it down on a notebook, right? If you have a notebook and just externalize your thoughts, because sometimes when you are under pressure and you're stressed out and you just have this tunnel vision and you're so focused on this one problem, you have a client that you're about to close after 6 months or 8 months and it didn't go through. You were actively pursuing an investment or funding and it didn't go through. You think that, you know, life is over, you know, it's all doom and gloom. Apologies for the noise in the background. But if you just externalize it a little bit, zoom out, you will start to understand that, you know, it's only going to get better. Failure is okay. I think fundamentally we have a culture of failing is not acceptable, and that it's something that you should be ashamed of. It's aib if you fail, if you don't do well on an exam, it's bad. No, failure is probably the best thing that's going to happen to you, because you're going to fail and realize that this is not the right path. There's an alternative path, right? So from a mental health perspective, I think accepting that we will fail before we even get to that point is the first step, so that when that does happen, you don't just completely crumble. And externalizing it when you get to that phase and then start to realize, you know what, I will emerge, I will rise like a phoenix from the ashes. That's the path for you to get out of that rut of mental. I mean, many founders go through really difficult mental challenges, right? Depression, isolation, they're just pigeonholed into this very dark web of, you know, I'm going to fail if I don't close this thing. But if you just externalize it a little bit and someone sheds a little bit of light, just a little bit of light, it's all the difference that makes for you to emerge out of it. And hopefully everyone has access to that one person or that one resource for you to kind of externalize it and just reflect and see everything's going to be okay, regardless.
Thank you, Reem. Mo?
I have three quick points to add to this. The first one is, I think as Sudanese, we are survivors. I mean, if you look at anyone who's like 20 plus years old or like even 15 plus years old, they have seen so much in life that, like, compared to other people, it's kind of like you should be rewarded by default for like the struggle that you've been through in life. So having that kind of like as the backbone of what you're doing is like, hey, if I could survive Sudan, basically I could survive everything else. Maybe not North Korea, but like it's kind of like a strength. Like we have a lot of struggle that some barriers, especially like mental barriers that other people go through, like the privileged people that have been through smaller struggles. Like when you compare it, you see that you have more resilience than them. And this is not to take from anyone's struggle. I think like we cannot do comparative struggling, but at least I think you get more resilience by just being like a Sudanese who's either like surrounded by a family that pressures you to like study specific specialties, or like you had to flee the country at some point, or maybe your family moved to a different country to become expat, and then you get surrounded with a new new social circles. But the point is, you're more resilient than what you think. So kind of capitalize on that. That's the first point. The second point is, if you manage to raise capital, make sure that you have someone on your cap table that you can call at midnight and they will pick up the phone. You could go after like the brands of the VCs that could give you millions of dollars, but by the end of the day, you need someone who understands you as a person. You need someone that you can call at any point, either crying or frustrated or like anxious, and they would pick up the call and actually treat you as a human, before anything else. And usually that kind of angel investor or like advisor, they usually are like more closer to the founders than the institutional funding partners, even though some of them are really, really good. So if you end up raising some money, make sure that someone in the cap table, you have them by the first name in your phone that you can call. And then the third point about failure, statistically speaking, people get more no's than yes. Unfortunately, in the news and like in social media, we hear about the successes more than the failures. But I think you can be very intentional about whom you talk to as like you can find the founder who failed 3-4 times before. You talk to them about like the struggles and the journeys and like what they have failed on before they become success. Or if you raise capital, this is one thing that we have done in our seed rounds is like when we talk to VCs, we don't ask them for their portfolio spotlights like the successful founders, but we ask them actually for references for founders that either like failed, were in the spotlight and dropped, or closed down the company or filed for bankruptcy, because these are the founders that are gonna give you the real truth. They're gonna give you like what happens when it doesn't go in the right path. So seek help from people that you trust and like they can treat you as a human first. Know that you are more resilient than what you think, and talk to people about their failures instead of successes, because that's where you learn and you get support.
Yeah, thank you so much. We already beyond time. Thank you all. So Reem have to drop. But if the others can stay, we can take this quiet questions that came in. So we can take 2 questions from them quickly. But then also thank you so much for taking the time. There's one question from Mustafa. How did you decide when to seek external capital versus bootstrapping? And what key metrics or signals guided that decision? So anyone would like to take this question?
I can maybe answer quickly from my perspective. I would say like I know that's not the answer you would like to hear, but it depends because what are you doing? Which market? Which sector of business? Like from my perspective, for example, in health tech, you really need like capital because your timelines are quite different in highly regulated fields. Your runway will be all affected by the milestones that you're trying to achieve. Are you doing heavy R&D, or actually you can hit the market very fast and start generating revenue? Are you in a point that it's actually competitors are there that you want to scale faster, or you can actually wait to bootstrap until like you increase your valuation? So there is lots of kind of factors you can take into effect, because you don't want to raise if you don't need to, but there is always reasons that specifically you want to raise for scaling faster, competitor, access to market, or like you're in a pivotal moment of market entry.
Thank you, Mustafa, for taking that. We can take another question by Mohammed. So he says, in market where labeled data is sparse or noisy, how do you build AI systems that are still credible to enterprise or investors? And also for first-time movers in heavily regulated markets, how do you frame AI as a risk reducer rather than a black box? I think if I understood the questions right, basically how would you build it with investors when basically you don't have a clear data to build based on it? Anyone that tried to enter the market like that, maybe? Ali Mo, CEO.
Yeah, I can maybe take this and I can flip it to Mo. And I would say something very interesting is you can get a partner that trusts in you early on, that perhaps is not a contract that you're getting out of them. You're getting some sort of early pilot that they're willing to be sometimes they could be an investor as well as in your company, but they're helping, giving you that access to data, iterating the product with you. And of course, you have to respect their anonymity. You have to anonymize the data for them and make it a very compelling proposition, right? They get something out of it at the end of the day of the pilot that they run with you. you get data, and maybe that could be the start of the journey. And sometimes that's a very focused first entity you're going after, right? Because you think they got the data you need, they will help you kickstart that. And sometimes extremely, extremely pivotal to choose the right flow. And I know in the technology right now, we're relying less on labeled data. This large language model trained on a lot of things. So maybe if you can find a way to wedge yourself in that is not super critical, but then gain access to the market that can give you that data with some sort of a very friends and family angel-like relation pilots. And that's where ecosystems kind of play. Then you can get to launch from there.
That's an amazing answer. I think for the second part, I think the AI being a black box, like systemically, is actually not going to be a problem for a long period of time. I think Thinking Machine Labs is working on retracing kind of the AI decision. So every AI decision in the future kind of going to be deterministic progressively. You cannot know it beforehand, but you can backtrack it. But I think one of the things about AI is you could basically trace every step between the input and the output, even though if it doesn't make sense. Like you don't know why the LLM output a specific output, but you could trace the reasoning behind it. You could trace like the intermediate answers, and that makes it less of a black box. So like when you give it the solution to someone, instead of saying, hey, you just put the input and you get the output, you can tell them, by the way, the agent fetched this specific type of data. This was the reasoning behind it. This is how they kind of analyze the data. This was the reasoning behind it. And this is how it came with a decision. And I think there is so much value of actually just giving the user a bit of kind of timeline of what happened between the input and output, that they start trusting it. Because by the end of the day, they just read kind of reasoning and they would give you back like some feedback if the reasoning doesn't make sense, or like if the agent fetched the wrong type of data instead of the correct type of data. But they need to see kind of that insight. And once they see that insight, they feel more confidence in the system itself instead of, just put your input and you'll get an output. So if you think about it from that perspective, I think you will be better than like other people who just have it as a black box. But also, like in a year from now, I think this whole thing gonna be solved by the frontier labs, and then you will have a traceability within the LLM itself, so you will know exactly what happened to reach the conclusion.
Yes, one last question, and then we wrap up. There is two questions. I'll try just to put them together. Basically speaking about when you don't have an MVP, you may have a viable product, and there is no MVP and prototype yet in place. What convinces an angel investor to back a tech founder? The other question was basically talking about how to choose investors and partners in different markets and regions. So basically, if we can get a quick answer into that. If I don't have a product, don't have an MVP yet, what would convince others if you were raising while you didn't have that yet on your side in your career and your journey?
I can just bring something which resonate just a bit. I think number one now, most likely, it's very easy to spin up a demo. It's so like a lot of these tools that enable. So I think the question of not having an MVP should probably be like, to what level do you consider that an MVP? And so we basically like MVD, so minimum viable demo that you can actually show to get that. And but you always, I think it's just think of it as the emotions. What is the emotion that you want the other person to have? And that might be basically something that might not actually be a working prototype, might just be a demo, or if it's in software, because now there's a lot of tools. If you go to ChatGPT and ask it to build you something that is a prototype, is much easier. So I'd say instead of thinking of, especially when it comes to angel investors, because angel investors are much close, and some investors, I think less of it as like being a viable product, but more of like, what do I want to communicate to that person? What do I want to like, what vision do I want to sell to them? And just make it into a demo or a story, but it doesn't have to be like an actual viable product, depending on where like your industry. If it's very difficult, let's say doing something in robotics where you need capital to actually have a MVP, maybe you can do some demonstration of something, even if it's not a robot, but it does like invoke an emotion. So think of it from that aspect.
Thank you so much, Osman. Thank you as well for all the panelists for your time. We went above time, but thank you so much for making the time. And before we closing, this is just a one session or one panel. And was glad to have everyone attending. The idea basically was to build on this conversation. To Fortnite started with also a bunch of others from these RT and other places, other people. We're thinking of launching a deep tech program to invest and build Sudanese-led businesses, even ones are in Sudan, but also outside Sudan, and see how we could increase the number of founders that are working in the sector, basically. More details on that will come in. We all see this as a very exciting time, and we believe that Sudanese could build good businesses. So more details will come into that. Maybe one last thing is there any final remarks or anyone want to add anything before we close the panel for today? Ali, see you open your mic.
Yeah, no, I really love the initiative, and I think it's wonderful. It's about time that we connect the dots and enable each other. And I am very certain that we can make quite a big impact. And thank you for really bringing us together, Ahmed.
Thank you. I think at the end شكرا لكم وتصبح على خير للناس بالليل وتبدو يومكم للناس البعدين يومي هذا وشكرا لكل زول كان حاضر معنا today. Thank you all. السلام عليكم.
شكرا.
سلام.